So thank you for coming, everyone. It's an exciting evening. It's good to see the room filled with people. And isn't it wonderful to have Phil and Akhil back in Melbourne after 4 years? Fabulous. So we are recording tonight. It's also a special night because we're doing the official launch of Akhil's book. And we're going to start with that. The first hour will be all about Akhil and his book. But I'd like to introduce a few people before we get started. First up, Darren over there, hello, Darren Wilson, who's the editor of the Boom Bust Bulletin and also the weekly blogs that come out as part of the Property Cycle Investor newsletter. And it's fabulous to have Darren on the team. It really is. He does a great job and we're very fortunate. Thank you, Darren.
You're welcome. You read that exactly how I wanted you to say it.
Thank you, thank you. I try hard, I try hard. I'm exhausted now, actually. Jonathan Brown is from London and he's part of the Shepherd Walwyn publishing company that has published Phil's book, Secret Life of Real Estate and Banking.
That's the podcast.
And thank you, Phil. Thank you for the help. And runs the podcast service with Shepherd Walwyn. He does some amazing interviews with the authors. And if you've not yet heard some of Jonathan's podcasts, I really encourage you to do that. I like to listen to them over and over again, actually, because once is not enough. So, welcome, Jonathan. I also would like to welcome Alan Anderson, which is Phil's son, and Alan lives in France, and it's wonderful that he's with us and with Phil. Good to see you, Alan. And Lily, also from London. Is Lily here?
She's on the desk.
Lily from London's on the desk, so also a big welcome to Lily. Now, we also have Tim Moffat here. And Tim, could you stand up? Thanks. Tim Moffat runs the 18.6 portfolio. And he runs it out of Adelaide, so it's great that you've taken the time to be here, Tim. Thank you. Okay. All right. I think I've done the welcomes. Shall we get started? Okay. Now, if I sit down here, you might need to shuffle around a little bit to be able to see us. All right. I'm going to do an introduction first, and then we're going to introduce Akhil to do some talking. So we're launching the Secret Wealth Advantage book, how you can profit from the economy's hidden cycle. I wanted to start by reading out Akhil's bio at the back of the book. So Akhil Patel is the director of Property Sharemarket Economics. And Akhil became interested in such cycles after his family's business went through difficult periods during the major recessions in the early 1990s and 2008. He refused to accept the conventional wisdom that these events could not be forecast in advance. After much study, he decided to develop a body of work that would help people, whether they were investors, business owners, or those just interested in doing something with their savings. With professional experience in the UK's civil service and international development, Akhil has worked on a range of issues from reviewing large infrastructure deals to helping establish the UK's £3 billion International Climate Fund. He has 2 master's degrees in finance and public policy and a first degree in classics from Oxford. Welcome, Akhil.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pretty impressive bio, isn't it? Now, we're going to learn more about Akhil as we go through this next hour. How are you finding Australia? How long have you been here so far?
So I arrived on the 7th of February. I came to Perth. It was approximately 40 degrees warmer in Perth than it was in London that I'd left 24 hours before. It was really nice to have a midwinter break from my perspective. And it's been fantastic. I always love coming here, apart from the jet lag, which I am not yet over. So if I fall asleep in the course of the evening, you'll forgive me.
You won't fall asleep.
Yeah, no, it's always great to be here. So thank you so much for seeing some familiar faces and many new ones as well.
Yes, fantastic, fantastic. So for me, when I read Akhil's book, it was like opening a box of chocolates. And I say that because, you know, when you open a box of chocolates, there's all types of deliciousness within that one package. And it's interesting, isn't it, me using the word delicious, talking about an economics book. But it actually is. I mean, the book is full of not only economics and its corruption, but also the education around the law of economic rent and the law of absorption. The book also covers the long wave, another cycle that's very important to the 18-year cycle. And in addition to that, you have a handbook that not only tells you what to do and when to do it, but how to think about it. And so it's an amazing, in this one book, there's so much information for investors, developers, business people, professional people. It really is. So I found Akhil's book to be that important that I bought copies for my nephews and my stepson, who are all in their 20s. I bought a copy for my brother, who's in his 50s, and a copy for my mum, who's in her 80s. And so this book is for all ages and all stages of life. It really is. Now, Akhil, did you know that UNESCO, which is the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organisation, there's a statistic that says around 130 million new books are published globally each year.
Wow. I didn't know that. 130 million. 130
million. But out of around 82% of people who want to write a book, there's only about 1 or 2% that actually finish their book and get it published. So you are in a very exclusive group of people.
Brilliant. Good
Brilliant. It absolutely is.
It makes the pain worth it, because it was rather painful towards the end.
Oh, okay, we'll talk about the pain. Now, you were telling me that when you were in Perth last week, that there was a random person that approached you and said, "Are you Akhil Patel?"
Yeah, I could get used to that, I have to say.
And this person had bought your book.
Yeah. So I think I subsequently found out from a friend that he was an accountant, and he'd sort of picked up the book, he'd read it, he'd watched the YouTube videos, and he clearly read to the biography because he saw my photo and he recognised me on this.
Yeah.
That also demonstrates that I used up-to-date photos.
Yeah.
Not one that was sort of 20 years.
Yes,
20 years
right. Yes, I understand what you're saying there. The thing is, I have also received emails from people around the world that have seen Akhil's book. And I thought I'd show you some of those tonight, and it's been the most amazing places where Akhil's book's been found. And this is my cue to show you where some of these books have been found. Now, I don't know if it wasn't you, Alan, that sent this in. Eiffel Tower. That's amazing. All those people are there to obviously read your book. So that's pretty special. Now, I don't think the book is actually propping up the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And again, I think those people are there to read your book.
Very good.
Now, let's forget about independence, US independence, forget about that. We're now reading, all of America is now reading Akhil's book.
It's good with the backdrop of tall buildings.
That's right. Yes. Well, Christ the Redeemer. And again, those people, they're there to read your book, Akhil. Now this is the statue, the Mayo statues in Easter Island. Now the book, well, I know one's using it as a nose.
Looks like it's blowing his nose. And
maybe a headrest. But I do believe that they have found your book extremely interesting.
Very good.
And I have to call this one out. I have to call this one out. this is Akhil's four-legged furry child. And look how exhausted Izzy is. She's exhausted. How many times did you get her to proofread your book, Akhil?
Yeah. I mean, you could say that maybe she was reading it, she fell asleep.
It was just for reading your credentials.
Yeah, well, that's right. Yeah, no, so I think I've said this, she maintained a rather callous indifference to the fact that I needed to write and needed to maintain a schedule and so on. Demand for walk and play and food came first throughout the process, which was actually very good. Kept me on an even keel.
Well, be careful what you put on Instagram, because that's where I got the photo from. Now, you launched your book in July last year, and since launch, there has been 4,335 paperback editions sold, 716 ebooks, 1,308 audiobooks, and around about another 300 sold directly. That's a total of approximately 6,659 or 1,109 per month. I've got to add in the numbers, don't I? Because Property Sharemarket Economics, we're all about numbers. So they're pretty impressive numbers.
Thanks. Yeah, I had no idea what to expect, but certainly it's exceeded the publisher's expectations. That's always a good start.
That's fabulous.
Yeah.
Now, you've got some other numbers that are of interest, or interesting numbers, haven't you? That you were mentioning to me about age, and wasn't there other things that you thought were, that's a rather interesting thing as to when it published?
Oh yes. Well, quite interestingly, and this was in no way designed. I promise you it really wasn't. I wish it had sort of come out 2 years before, but I discovered kind of towards the end that 2023 is, and I think it might even have been July 2023 to the month, was 144 years since the publication of Progress and Poverty by Henry George, which in one way or another is the inspiration behind this book, Phil's book, Fred Harrison's works, if those of you are familiar with that, and so on. So I thought that was a nice piece of resonance.
Yeah.
I think we wouldn't be sitting here today if it wasn't for Henry George.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So you currently live in London. Yes. But you were born in Africa?
No.
Right.
I'm the boring one in my family. So my grandparents from India, they moved to Kenya in the 1940s. That's where my parents were born and raised.
Your parents were born and raised in Kenya?
That's right.
Got it.
Yeah, and I still have family there. I was born in London, so my parents got married and then moved to the UK in the 70s.
Yeah, that is boring.
Yeah, it's very, well, I've got family on 5 continents, and I'm stuck sort of not far from where I grew up.
Family on 5 continents.
Yeah,
holidays are hectic there.
Yeah, but excuse to take lots of them.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
Absolutely. So you're co-director with Phil at Property Sharemarket Economics, but you also work at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Now, the bank is owned by 72 countries, and they do projects on a global scale. But can you briefly explain to us, what is your role there?
Yeah, so, well, EBRD, for those who don't know, it's an international development bank. We sort of finance countries where they have some prospect of doing things better. And to kind of make the deals stack up, I work in a team that raises some of that finance.
Right.
Yeah. And so we're talking about infrastructure projects, lending to small businesses where they can make some efficiency gaining investments and so on.
Does that help you with your PSC work and your research?
No, I keep them separate, but it's a very useful way to kind of get to see what's going on around the world.
Yes, so, yeah, I'd say so. You've been writing about the real estate cycle for years now. How many years have you been writing about it?
Well, for probably about 10 years, properly. Well, I started a newsletter with an Agora affiliate in 2016, so that was 7 years before the publication. But I was doing some work largely under the watchful eye of Phil since about 2012. But I actually first came across the cycle in, I think it was 2014, 2015, 2016. So that's 7 years before the publication. But I was doing some work largely under the watchful eye of Phil since about 2012. But I actually first came across the cycle in, I think it was 2014, 2015, 2016. So that's 7 years before the publication. But I actually first came across the cycle in, I think it was 2014, 2015, 2016. So that's 7 years before the publication. But I actually first came across the cycle in, I think it was 2014, 2015, 2016. So that's 7 years before the publication. But I actually first came across the cycle in, I think it was 2014, 2015, 2016. So that's 7 years before the publication. But I actually first came across the cycle in, I think it was 2014, 2015, 2016. So that's 7 years before the publication. But I actually first came across the cycle in, I think it was 2014, 2015, 2016. So that's 7 years before the publication. But I actually first came across the cycle in, I think it was 2014 in 2006 when I read one of Fred Harrison's book. I think he published Boom Bust in 2006, 2007, thereabouts. And I'd read my Henry George even before that, so that was sort of it was a long gestation process. The last decade has been when I've really got to grips with the cycle and how it works, and it's sort of various contours, how it might vary from cycle to cycle, and also in particular, and I think this was the contribution I thought I could make to something which is, it's been somewhat researched, and Phil's book is to a certain extent the definitive guide to US history on the cycle, but I felt I wrote the book that I wished I'd had when my family's business was experiencing those problems in 2008, 2009.
So was it always your intention from a younger Akhil to write a book, and you then chose the subject, or was it the other way around?
No, it was the other way around. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. No. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if anyone in the audience has written a book. You kind of, I think, for probably about 95% of the process, you feel like a bit of an imposter, and it's only until about a couple of months after publication that I'd even call myself an author. So I never thought of myself as a writer. I find, writing is a difficult process, particularly if you kind of care about trying to convey something clearly and in a way that people can understand. And so it's never been an intention to write a book.
At what point did you think that you were ready to write the book?
Sometime about sort of 6 or 7 years ago, I felt, I felt there was a contribution, there was a little gap in what people were picking up about the cycle. I mean, this was the benefit of writing a newsletter. I get the most common type of email was, this is really interesting information, so what do I do about it? And so I wanted to write a book which distilled all of the insights from Fred Harrison, Phil Anderson, Mason Gaffney, Fred Feldvari, all these kind of great economists and researchers who have done so much to develop our understanding, Homer Hoyt, Roy Wenslick, and so on. I wanted something that distilled that into kind of clear principles or kind of points of reference as you navigate through a cycle. And then suggestions for what to do about it. Bearing in mind that this is just a forecast of how things might develop, but of course things might play out differently. And also something that would not be useful just for the next few years, but potentially for the next few decades.
Did you track how long it took you to write the book?
Well, I was very painfully aware of how long it was taking, particularly when my family and my friends could have said, so how's the book going? When's it going to be finished? When's it going to be out? And I didn't really have an answer for them. So I signed a book contract in May 2020. I handed in the first draft in May 2022. It took about most of the remainder of the year to edit it, and then publication was last July. But I mean, to be fair, lockdown really slowed the process down, which sounds a bit sort of contradictory, because you would have thought sitting at home for an extended period of time would give you ample opportunity to write. But I don't know how you found lockdown. And I mean, Victoria, you had a particularly difficult one. As soon as 5 o'clock turned around, I was sort of keen to open the fridge and drink beer, then sit in front of my computer and start writing or continue writing.
Oh, that's how you did your best work then?
When I was pissed.
Yeah.
No, it delayed me.
I was not going to say that.
It delayed me, and then things opened up in the summer of that year. And of course, the last thing I wanted to do was stay at home and write. I wanted to be out. And, so.
Yeah. So it ended up being a difficult time generally, really, to write a book such as this, which is so clearly written and expressed. 3 years then.
3 years,
about
yeah.
3 years?
Yeah, which I think is probably a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah. With the editing process, did the publisher edit much? Like, did you have control over the editing process?
I did, but that's, I think, partly because the draft I sent them had a pretty clear idea of how it would, what the purpose of the book was and how it would sort of unfold. But they did question whether it really needed some chapters, including the corruption of economics chapter, which I found quite surprising. So it's sort of, it's you got it. But once I was able to explain that it was, it's a key to the kind of reason why no one sort of really understands the cycle. I think they were quite satisfied with that. And it wasn't a case that they thought it was badly written. It's just that they wondered, if you're trying to give people investment ideas, why would you need to have a chapter on that? But I think it's pretty clear that it's kind of central to the story.
Yeah, it's an integral part of it, isn't it?
I think also, you've probably noticed that it talks about an 18-year cycle that has 18 chapters, and the chapters that correspond to a particular phase of the cycle are kind of positioned in a way that, so chapter 1 is the start, chapter 7 is the mid-cycle, chapter 12 is the start of the kind of winner's curse, the final 2 years, chapter 14 is the summit, the peak of the cycle. So that's quite deliberate. And so trying to kind of justify having that many chapters and organising the book in that way was also, there was a bit of a conversation there.
Well, you handled the publisher well then when explaining what the requirements were, really.
I mean, and I worked with a great editor, so I can't, certainly being challenged about these things is a good thing.
So was the lockdown situation your biggest challenge writing it, or was there something else that really challenged you while you were writing it?
I actually learned a lot about the cycle writing about it. And I found that surprising, because when I signed the book contract, I was very confident. I said, I've been writing a newsletter for 4 years. I've got at least 150,000 words worth of material. So it'll just be a case of, polishing up a few newsletters, writing an introduction, doing a bit of editing and handing it in. And so then I said, well, you'll have the first draft by Christmas, which was, of course...
Christmas 2020?
Yeah. It seems ludicrous in hindsight. And so it was a challenging process, but when you really sit down to really know if you understand something, try and explain it to someone with no prior knowledge. And I didn't want to assume too much, even though I knew that I was writing for people like you who'd possibly been reading our work for quite a number of years. I found that to really sort of break it down into stages, and then within each stage of the cycle, what sort of things are you looking for? What's really kind of essential to the story? I had to do quite a lot of thinking. Then also trying to explain how money works, how governments create money, how the law of economic rent plays out, to sort of really tell that story in a simple way, but in a way that isn't kind of ephemeral, contains substance. That was quite challenging. And it probably took quite a lot of... Once I actually became consistent with my writing, was probably the thing that took the longest.
Did you learn anything new about yourself during the process?
Well, I knew that I was a procrastinator, but I didn't realise to what extent. So in some weeks, some months, it was almost anything but writing. Well, I mean, I've done it. I think the feedback has largely been positive, and so I know I can write a decent book. I think I wouldn't. I was maybe perhaps a bit blasé when I started, and that might be a bit of a tendency as well. So I've learned that I shouldn't. That's definitely a learning point.
So your commitment and motivation to write the book was clearly very strong to overcome those types of learnings about yourself.
Yeah, and particularly when a lot of my friends were telling me that they'd used the time in lockdown to do all sorts of things. I mean, I don't know how it was over here, but a lot of people took up baking, and particularly baking sourdough bread. I don't know quite what that was all about, but they'd learned all these new skills, and I was sort of felt I was stuck in front of a computer.
Well, you learnt the skill of writing at an amazing a highly saleable book that's going to help thousands and thousands of people. I mean, I like sourdough bread, but you know, this is much better. What do you think is the most powerful chapter in the book?
Well, my favourite chapter is definitely the corruption of economics. I had a lot of fun trying to create a narrative that sort of, and really sort of try to demonstrate what the game of Monopoly is really about. Not just that it's it's trying to teach people about land value tax, but also how actually within the game it's the sort of dynamics of boom and bust and economic rent. So that was really fun. I think a lot of people have found the chapters from 10 onwards, particularly the ones about where we are currently in the cycle.
But I'm asking you.
Well, no, I found those quite nice to write.
Yeah, so the most powerful chapter you think is the corruption of economics.
Yeah.
Do you think that's the most important chapter as well?
Yeah, possibly, or the law of economic rent, or the chapter linked to that, which kind of tries to demonstrate that economic rent is not just physical land. It's any place, location where people are coming together to interact, to exchange.
Yes, I find your answers interesting because your answers don't include anything about timing. Yeah, it's about the reason why there is a particular cycle. It's the reason why. And so for someone to really understand that, about the timing, it's about understanding the reason why. And so those chapters of the corruption of economics and the law of economic rent and law of absorption, they are the most important and the most powerful. I would agree with that. Yeah.
Well, look, I mean, timing is the reason why the time works is you need to understand the cycle in a sort of causal way, so you have confidence that actually in the future it will repeat.
Yes.
And repeat in a way that is quite rhythmic.
Yes. So I'm going to go on to the book now. And in your introduction of the book, you talk about Professor Garicano. Did I pronounce that okay? Yeah. Garicano?
Yeah.
And Professor Garicano was presenting to the Queen at the London School of Economics as to the reasons behind the global financial crisis, yeah? And one of the reasons that was given was it was principally a failure of the collective minds of bright people as the reasons for the GFC. My question to you, Akhil, is that you mentioned that years later you interviewed Professor Garicano and you asked if any of the lessons had been learnt as hoped by the British Academy, and his response was no, they had not. Now, why did you interview him? I mean, how did that come about? Why did you interview Professor Garicano? That struck me as...
Yeah, well, actually, interestingly, one of our subscribers is a professor at LSE.
London School of Economics.
London School of Economics. And so I thought it was an interesting story, and I was quite conscious that I'm in London and this all took place in London, so I wanted to try to get a slightly different spin on the story which had been told in the newspapers, and so...
Oh, so it was for the book?
Yeah, it was for the book.
Oh, you interviewed him for the book?
Yeah, I wanted to know a little bit about what the Queen had been asking about and how she had how it came to be that she was getting a briefing. And actually, she was sort of the royal household. They sort of prepare the kind of, I guess they make the arrangements for a member of the royal family for a visit like this. And they had said, well, she's quite interested to know what the hell is going on. They didn't obviously put it quite like that. And so I thought that was quite interesting. And I'd wanted to send her a copy of the book. Unfortunately, she died before I finished it.
Did you send it?
Another reason not to procrastinate. But I think she's been receiving kind of probably on a daily, if not weekly basis for the best part of 7 decades, kind of government papers, what's going on, and so on. And I'm sure that, I mean, she never really told anyone what she thought about things, but I'm pretty sure that she would have been quite sceptical of the response that she got from the British Academy, because, you know, she's kind of seeing all this. She sees that things move up and down and governments come and go and so on. But anyway, won't have the chance to interview her.
Yeah, it's quite an unacceptable response, really. And have you sent it to the King then?
No, I haven't.
Right.
One day. The publisher was not so keen on me to do that.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So I had the pleasure of sending an email out to the people that are here tonight asking what's your favourite chapter and why, and a question. So I've got a series of comments and questions for you.
Okay.
And the first one's a comment actually from Livio. And Livio says that his favourite part of the book is actually part 13, chapter 13, part 13, which is page 208, The Market Can Be Timed. And the reason why Livio says that's his favourite is, I feel this is the most revolutionary concept in investing, saving heartache and unnecessary lost capital. That's quite a powerful statement, but it's very true. And when I go to page 208, there's 9 points on that page. Just that one page is a revolutionary concept in investing, saving heartache and unnecessary lost capital. That is powerful, Akhil. The 9 points, I mean, it allows investors, to traverse, navigate the cycle, protect themselves throughout the 18-year period. It is a powerful piece of work. And Glenn, thank you, Glenn, also for sending in. He said if he is to single any one chapter out, it would be the prologue. Because if you don't know where you're going, you won't know when you've arrived. And the prologue provides an excellent descriptor of the cycle that gets your head in the right place before you dive into detail. His question for you, Akhil, is in chapter 9, which is The Magic of Money, part 2. Are you essentially getting at the same thing as do modern monetary theorists?
Yeah. So, I mean, modern monetary theory is not particularly modern. It's not really about money, and it's not really a theory. But apart from that, it's I think a fairly accurate description of how money is created in the economy, which is it's essentially created into existence by government, because we all need a means of exchanging goods, and historically it's been gold and so on, but gold is not a very good medium of exchange. We've gone beyond that, so in the modern system, it's government, and it's perfectly rational. I mean, Abraham Lincoln said this, and Kennedy and others. The problem is that when they overdo it for political reasons as opposed to what the economy needs. But yes, that is correct. It's linked to ideas around MMT.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Ben sent in chapter 16, which is how Akhil himself was scammed.
That was painful. Painful to go through it, painful to write about it, to admit it, and so on.
The reason why that Ben said it's his favourite is because it's an honest, personal reflection from the writer himself. It indicates that we are all human and prone to error. It therefore makes the whole thesis of his book even more powerful, as it serves as a roadmap to protect innocent investors. So just that is the reason why you wrote about it, isn't it? Because having that response, it says, okay, well, I did the right thing. Did the right thing of writing about.
Yeah. It was. As I said, difficult to write. In some ways, easy to write because it was kind of personal history. I think you can't. It's impossible to be an investor for any length of time without. It might not be outright fraud, but you've been offered to invest in something that just doesn't do what it says it can do, what it purports to do. They take risks with they're not honest about how they're handling money and so on. I think we've probably all experienced it in some ways, maybe not quite to the same extent, but so yeah, that was for that. I totally understand. I hired someone in a previous business who stole quite a bit of money from my business, and it feels really, you feel violated, don't you? Yeah.
Absolutely violated. So Thank you for writing about it.
You're quite welcome. I mean, well, look, the reality is our entire system, our entire world is built on trust. And when that trust is violated, as it often does, and particularly towards the end of the cycle, you know, it can really profoundly affect your worldview. So, and again, another reason for that chapter is to demonstrate that it can happen to anyone. In fact, the smarter you are, the worse it is, or sometimes, because you kind of feel you know it all, you're immune to these things, you can spot them. But even you know, anyone can get sort of sucked into things.
Yeah, totally. So Ben's question is, what strategies do you now employ to block out the noise and sound when the market gets hot, bullish and euphoric near the peaks? What strategies do you employ?
Gosh, where to begin? I mean, in relation to the kind of specific reasons why I fell for something, I mean, you know, it's quite a glib statement to say and perhaps harder to live by, but if something is too good to be true, it is. I mean, you know, you do not get the idea that you sort of could get windfall gains and so on for any length of time is just simply not true. And I think the problem is that good returns breed sort of this confidence that it's going to continue. And the best example of that was Isaac Newton, who invested in the stock of the South Sea bubble, made an absolute packet, got out, and the market continued up, so he then stuck it all back in right at the top. And he's the brightest, you know, one of the brightest minds in the history of humanity. So if it's too good to be true, I just won't touch it. I mean, of course, we're going to get all of those coming up in the next few years, so maybe I'll have to, you know, you have to remind me on it.
How do you cut out the noise, though? How do you...
Well, I don't read the news.
Don't read the news?
Yeah, I actually read a very interesting book. I mean, it's funny to say that, because given that I write a newsletter, but I read a book, very interesting book last year called Stop Reading the News, by this Swiss philosopher, I think, or thinker, who wrote a book called The Art of Thinking Clearly. It's that sort of idea. And he says that if something's important enough in the news, one of your mates will tell you about it. You don't need to indulge in this sort of business, which is really kind of entertainment more than actual knowledge sharing. And the other thing is it sort of induces both emotion and you know, finance sort of thing, you know, idea that someone else is doing better than you and therefore you're missing out and therefore you should do something about it. It also stops you feeling, it amplifies panic, and you know the world is going to kind of collapse. And so if you cut all of that out, you're not constantly on this roller coaster of emotion. And then even if you do nothing more than that, you can make kind of more sober decisions. I mean, obviously I do read the news occasionally, and I do kind of follow what's going on in the markets, and I'm very good, I think, at reading price charts, and that often helps to ground my view of what's going on in the world from a cycle and finance and an economics point of view, so that very much helps. And then I try to surround myself by people who have something substantial to say about what's going on, and that helps as well.
So in summary, learn how to read a chart.
Yep.
Learn how to read a chart. So if there is something that's exciting or depressing or very emotional, go to the chart, is what you're saying. Go to the chart, because the chart will tell you if it's warranted or not, or if it's propaganda or not. Go to the chart.
Yeah.
And I think somewhere also in the book, and you talk about if who you're listening to does not include the land conversation about law of economic rent, law of absorption, that type of thing, then be wary. Be wary about what they have to say in regards to the economy. Is that?
Yeah, I think I won't need to explain that statement to anyone here. The last 24 months have been an ample demonstration of that. You know, everyone's calling for collapse. They can't understand why things keep going up and so on. It's simply where we are in the land cycle.
Thank you. Trevor wrote in to say his favourite chapter, which is similar to you, Akhil, the same as you, is The Corruption of Economics. And he says, I think Akhil was brilliant commencing with the story of the monopoly creators, then linking this to Henry George's amazing economic rent thesis, which was then killed off by the rich bankers and landowners. See how dramatic I get when I'm saying that, because it is. It's like a horror story, really.
It's a Greek tragedy almost.
It is.
Do it to ourselves.
Yeah.
That's the idea.
I was riveted also by the chapter because it also links it to the fall of the Berlin Wall and how there was a group of economists that were trying to assist Russia to develop an economic system where land's earnings or land rent was shared amongst the citizens. But again, this too failed due to vested interests.
Yeah.
So it is a riveting chapter. So Trevor's question to you is it possible for economic scholars or politicians to accept and adopt the Henry George theory in society today?
I mean, look, there are a handful of economists in mainstream academia who are big proponents of the kind of Henry George idea. You know, Joe Stiglitz. There's a few others over the years, and there were about 30 economists who supported the ideas. They wrote to President Gorbachev in 1990 and said, "This is how you develop." But the problem is that, and this actually goes back to something that Professor Garicano said when I interviewed him, is that there are incentives that are kind of funneling a lot of money and a lot of people to investing the wrong way at the wrong time and overdoing it. And one of the incentives in academia in relation to economic thinking is, you have to fit the kind of mainstream structure to have your papers accepted, to get advancements in your career and so on. And so it kind of becomes this self-perpetuating kind of myth, as it were, about how the system works, and it's almost immune to any additional evidence and so on. And I don't. Probably a lot of people do this in good faith. They just doing what they need to do for their careers. But of course, because economics is so influential on our everyday lives, it's unfortunately kind of creates the world the way it is. And there's a tremendous missed opportunity. I mean, people talk about Russia as a small economy, and if you look at GDP, it's true, it's a fraction the size of the US or China and so on. But I mean, if you add up the value of all of its kind of assets, its land and what's underneath it and above it and so on, I mean, it's by far and away the wealthiest country in the world. And it could have been, an absolute model for development and equitable living and a prosperous society and all those things that we want for ourselves and our children. And it's just such a shame that it's this corruption-riven, antagonistic country, very corrupt, very brutal in many ways. It's just a real shame, and that's to a certain extent on us.
So that's an emphatic no. No, Trevor, no, sorry, it is an emphatic no. Look, and Phil has been saying this for years, and so have you, Akhil. That is why the cycle will continue, because it won't change. It's not going to change. It is why the cycle will continue, and understanding that is imperative. Yeah, thank you. It's a great response. Mitch sent in, said, the entire book is great. I agree. I enjoy the global cycle as it does pose some questions looking forward. So his question is, you mention about tech and AI potentially affecting the cycle, but this is dependent on data input, like garbage in, garbage out. Yeah. Therefore, potentially just making the booms and busts bigger than ever. If markets traditionally have had a component of being emotionally driven, and there are potentially influences on humans and their emotional states, therefore leading to certain investment behaviours, is there a chance that by having investments controlled by AI or your own robo-advisor, this may negate some of the mass emotional driven investment plays? Will it negate it?
No, I think it will probably enhance it. So I don't know if people are familiar with ChatGPT. I mean, it's an unbelievably powerful tool, but it's also in some ways very basic. And it will get better, but there's so much noise. It doesn't you can see sometimes when you ask it a complicated question, it doesn't quite know where to get the answer from. And I think this will only be enhanced by as it gets more sophisticated, actually. But you know, when humanity does kind of get around a consensus going on and so on, it will follow that. From our history of the cycle, people are usually looking at the extremes of the cycle. So if anything, it will amplify the booms and busts. And the other thing I'd say is that one of the possibly negative side effects of AI is it kind of probably makes us less critical thinkers because it's all kind of done for us. And so, you know, we won't necessarily know how to interrogate the answers we're getting in the way that we should. So
yes, absolutely. It's lagging, not predictive. Yes, yes, very good, very good.
But, you know, maybe there's a way for us, you know, who do understand how the cycle works to use AI to maybe, you know, to influence things.
Oh, well, we need to get your book sold then across the globe.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. If you know anyone who's a Taylor Swift type influencer.
Oh, yes, send it to Taylor.
Please, please tell them to tweet about it.
Great idea. So I want to finish off before we open to other questions with this paragraph, which is towards the end of the book. It's on page 260. And I'm going to read this out. Our journey is now complete. It has been quite the expedition. You have come to know the various contours of the cycle, its peaks and troughs. You will have felt its beat, slow and unsteady at first, with some pauses along the way, then the change in pace, the rise in intensity, the violent crescendo to a climax, and finally the capitulation. It all sounds rather erotic, Akhil. I do have to say that. It just came. I didn't plan that. That just came. You have come to understand why land is key to the cycle, as fundamental to the economy as gravity is to the physical universe. You will have seen how deliberate, willful blindness of this is inculcated into our leaders. You can have the confidence that the cycle will repeat. I love that paragraph. Thank you, Akhil. So I'd like to now open the room. We've got some time for questions. Other questions, I believe. Let me just check that. Yes, we do. Who would like to ask Akhil a question? Joe, please.
Where does Bitcoin fit into this?
Well, it's at the moment, a very speculative and speculative asset. So it will kind of amplify the boom, I think. It is potentially starting to display a bit of maturity. And so maybe it might be something that people run to when you have a crisis. But I think the jury is still out because at the moment it sort of kind of goes up and down like a yo-yo. And related to the crypto coins as well. But the underlying technology, the blockchain technology which Bitcoin is based on is absolutely fundamental. It's going to be, along with AI and sort of clean energy and so on, it's one of those foundational technologies that's going to power the remainder of the century.
Power the remainder of the century. Anyone else? Yes.
Akhil, I've been in property all my life. I'm a student of property, and I've observed over the last 50 years or so that there's some key events that occur that cause a correction. One being I watch unemployment rate very carefully because I know in the early 80s, unemployment here got to 10%. Property failed every time that seems to happen. That's one thing. Second is the availability of cash, so liquidity. Something I watch very carefully. And the third thing is supply. And I saw that probably in Canary Wharf as well, in Darling Harbour, in Docklands here. We overbuilt apartments in early 2000s. That market, came back 25%. But right now, there's just an acute shortage of stock. Builders are going broke everywhere here. And vacancy rates are like, the lowest I've seen in 30, 40 years, like 1% vacancy rate. I can't see how we're going to create this supply to align with the cycle. You know, and so it's either got to be something else that's going to cause it this time, but I can't.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things I'd say about that. I mean, it's true that a lot of the economy and particularly the property industry and others got very used to very low interest rates for sort of a decade or more, and then when things adjusted, they sort of all collapsed, or they found it very difficult, or they couldn't do activity. The cycle doesn't happen in the same way every single time, and it doesn't happen in the same location in the same way. The real vulnerability in a cycle is not necessarily what's going on at the centre of a town, where there is always going to be, to a certain extent, demand, and there's always going to be potentially not enough supply, and therefore prices are very resilient even in a downturn. It's going to be where you've got oversupply at sort of fairly marginal locations, and in the years up to, well, I say, the edge of towns or a new town which no one's heard to, but suddenly for this cycle it's the place to be. And for a time, it looks like there isn't enough supply for the demand, and there's actually lots of, all these kind of definitive statistics come out and say that, there's a big imbalance, and then everyone sort of is crowding in. So I think that's kind of where you want to be looking for the vulnerability, not necessarily what's going on in Canary Wharf or the centre of cities and so on. I think those markets tend to be quite resilient. But also, 2022 and 23 were quite painful adjustments for kind of large swathes of the economy. And actually, I think we're only just now starting to get going. I mean, credit is becoming more abundant. There's been support for particularly residential real estate and so on. I think this has got quite some months to run as sort of supply and demand comes into balance. So we're nowhere near the sort of the process whereby you might get to a potential kind of trigger point, which I try and describe in sort of the cycle. Things can flip quite quickly though. Sentiment can shift very quickly, and so while it might seem that we're only emerging from this period where it's quite stuck, it can change quite quickly.
Because supply is fairly tight, like it globally, isn't it? It's
Well, I don't know specifics in, say, the Middle East. They're building a huge amount of stuff. I think that might be the point at which you really see the cycle in its full kind of glory, shall we say. I don't know how oversupplied it is. I mean, the problem is that as kind of Manhattan in the 1920s, commercial real estate was oversupplied for years, and people knew, well, maybe a lot of people knew that there was a bit too much building going on, but the tax incentives were such and the finance was such that they could, to their mind, profitably build and hope that they would be able to exit in time and so on. That never.
I think in your last chapter, Akhil, you write about it's now a global cycle. The last chapter is about being a global cycle. And so even though there may be a country, hopefully I'm saying this right, even though there may be a country that is still relatively healthy and growing, if there is another country that is a strong, large country where things fall over, it will ripple. It will ripple around the world. And Australia is a small country when you compare to some of the other, America, which is US property prices, is one of the leading indicator. And so it's kind of impossible for Australia to then be immune to it. So it might not be the indicators right with us, it's elsewhere, but it will ripple out to us. Does that sound fair?
I think that's going to be the story of the remaining years. I think a lot of the data might look quite healthy in Australia and other places. If you have a big commodities boom, relationships with China get better. You still have banks that are fairly well capitalised. But the problem is that anyone who's in the markets, regardless of whether they're an investor in Australia or whatever, are always watching to see what the Federal Reserve does. And so sentiment is global in a sense. And maybe China is starting to perform that role as well. And so people take their cues from something that's kind of overseas. And I think the key thing is really not so much that things, at the peak of the cycle, it's not so much that things are falling, it's that the flow of credit is no longer increasing. Because when you get to the really final parts of the cycle, you need an increasing flow, so that the amount that's going into the property market needs to be increasing each year in order to keep prices moving up. And when that even just kind of slows down but is still going up, the mathematics work, but actually it just starts to fall, because it's just purely based upon the idea that you're investing in an asset which will be worth more tomorrow than it is today. And that process can flip very quickly. And so we have to be quite watchful.
That's very good, Akhil. Unemployment and those types of indicators tend to be lagging as well. So we'll finish it there, and we'll take a break for about 10 minutes. So we were hoping that there would be physical copies of Akhil's book for you to buy, but they've not arrived. So what we will do, if you'd like to buy one of Akhil's books, they'll probably arrive tomorrow. And Akhil, you can still purchase it. Akhil will sign it, and then we'll organise the delivery of it to you. So that's how we're going to get around that. And so you can, for signing of books, you can do now and at the end, and for purchasing, probably at the end. Yes? Yes? Yeah. Okay, thank you, everybody, and thank you, Akhil.